we underestimate to which we must address ourselves as a people. And too often we have people who think that our issues and the things that we have to deal with can be described in 25 words or less. And so there are people who think that we are small people and small-minded people, so they don't have to write sometimes some sizable material. If other nations and other people require libraries to deal with their issues, so do we. And the interesting thing about the upcoming book is that with that 800 pages, it's basically a survey looking at various areas of life. You recall, we titled it Blueprint, and we are essentially then trying to lay out a blueprint, a prescriptive book. Now we are coming into more and more into prescriptive type of writing, laying out very practical kinds of steps and very practical methods for achieving what it is we must achieve as African people. This means we have to cover a lot of territory. We're covering psychology, we're covering, of course, history, sociology, a great deal of political science, a great deal of economics, and related fields, anthropology and so forth, because all of these have to be combined in the process of nation building.
Nation building.
And this is what we really have to be about.
We need to be about nation building.
A nation as a people. If you're not thinking in terms of nationhood, then I must say, frankly, you're not thinking seriously of being liberated.
That's right.
Trying to integrate and merge with our enemies is not going to solve our problem.
Sure ain't.
And it's not going to happen.
No, it ain't going to happen.
It is a fantasy that has kept us from...
We can't integrate into a burning building.
The idea that we're going to one day be one with these people.
No. Amen. Amen, Dr. Wilson.
That we're going to merge into invisibility with these white folks. And even if that were possible, we should question our motives for wanting to do so.
Yeah, why do we want to do that?
You know, why would you want to merge with the world's greatest criminals and thieves? With the people who have the worst values the world has ever known. It amazes me sometimes how we hear some of our parents telling our children we want to be just like them. Yeah, it's a joke. It's an insult to hear Dan Quayle or to hear President Clinton come and lecture black folk on values. How dare we let
Thank you, bro.
these people into our churches to try to lecture us on values? Yeah, it's an amazing situation to try to talk to us.
Can you hear that? You can hear him speaking, right? Let me know in the chat if you can hear him speaking.
To us about population control.
Population control.
Yeah. The first thing we think about when people talk about population control is the overproduction of African people. You know, so-called third world people. As I said, we can solve the overpopulation problem quickly if we could reduce the European population.
Yes. Damn right.
Yes. And people, of course, as I tell you, this world has always been backwards, you see. The ones who need to be reduced most drastically have the world thinking the other way around.
See?
Because a good deal of the problem sometimes is not the number of people in the world, but the number of greedy people
Yes.
in the world. But you have a so-called minority of people who consume the vast majority of the world's
I'm glad you can
resources.
hear it.
This large population that they talk about could eat better if these people weren't eating everything up. And so, to a good extent, sometimes to have more for everybody to eat, you have to get rid of the greedy ones.
Yes.
Ones who are over-consuming.
Gluttonous.
Who are taking the food out of other people's mouths.
Yeah, they gluttonous.
Say, but here you have people who rob you and take everything you got and then say, you don't have enough to support yourself. You know, this is the kind of
greatest trick
that we got
ever
going on
pulled.
here. We're going to come back to this issue of values. But we're going to talk a little bit about African-centered consciousness, personality, and culture as instruments of power. Because ultimately, this is what this whole struggle is about. Power.
Power.
Not loving one another and all those things we hear.
No integration.
Power.
It's about power.
And to a great extent, the problems that we are confronted with today as African people in America flows from our powerlessness or our inappropriate use of power. We've been made to even talk about it. We've been made to think that power is sinful.
Yep, it's bad.
And that to pursue it is a sinful pursuit.
Exactly. Me pursuing the fact I want power, people don't like that. Especially power. A melanated man.
Without power, there's no life. A battery without power is dead. You need power to act, to behave in the world, to deal with the world. And consequently, then, we must interpret what we are about in terms of power. And we have the power, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we do.
We have the possibilities. We just need to reorganize ourselves, reorganize our consciousness and our personality and our culture, and see them as instruments of power and use them as instruments of power to transform our situation. So we should not look at consciousness as some abstraction. As I often tell people, the most practical thing you can have is a good theory, is a good concept.
That's right.
To guide your behavior.
You hear that?
To be used as an instrument to measure reality, as an instrument to test.
Y'all hear that? To have a good idea to test against reality. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's why listening to these brothers, these elders, can bring us out of this perpetual spiral of us going down. All it takes is one person to have an idea and the rest join in with that idea. It's unstoppable. That's exactly what he just got to finish saying. You can't be tight with your purse strings. That's basically what he's saying. Your ideas have to flow and they have to be funded. If they're not funded, they don't die. And you never liberate yourself. You people, that's why I say I'm gonna have to start playing these things and then going through and stopping and talking to y'all, because some of y'all don't get it. Well, maybe it's just I've been doing it so long and I'm just not showing my face and coming on the scene and people think that I'm somehow new. No, I've been learning about this stuff for over 30 years. I just never really came on YouTube and all these other sites because I'm sort of a dinosaur when it comes to this stuff. I'm learning as I go along. I ain't asking nobody. I'm just sort of doing it. I don't have a problem asking nobody. But let's get back to the lecture.
Reality. A good theory then organizes the world and organizes one's approach.
A good theory organizes the world.
Be able to evaluate the world in terms of where one wants to go and in terms of what one wants to do. To be without fit in is to approach the world on an ad hoc basis, just to meet it here and there and to not approach it in a systematic form. To live reactionarily, always reacting to what other people are doing. Always being overwhelmed by events and overwhelmed by the future instead of creating events and creating the future and making the future.
Making
When
the
you
future.
add in a good theory and a good concept,
Do y'all hear that? Dr. Wilson said, you can make your future. We want to get rid of the Chinese. We want to get rid of the Lebanese. You want to get rid of these other folks. You ain't got to go in there and physically do nothing to them. Nothing. All you got to do is take your money and try your damnedest to spend it with people that look like you. That's it. Find brothers and sisters from the continent or from the diaspora that's trying to do something and put money behind them because they have great ideas that could probably revolutionize and change the world, but nobody invests in them. And your enemy ain't gonna invest in them. If your enemy invests in your sons and daughters of Africa, they're gonna invest in them to take their talents to use it for evil. That's what they do. They take the brightest and smartest among us out of our midst, exploit their intelligence, and use it in some type of dirty bomb type of situation to use against the very people that they come from. And we need to be able to keep those people, because I do not like to see brain drain. All our good people are snatched out. They put into a different track. The Europeans snatch them up out of there, give them these scholarships to go to these schools over in Europe, and it whitewashes their mind. Now they don't even want to come back and help their people. The smartest among us don't even come back. It's because we don't take the time to put money behind them.
one is able to do that. Consciousness. Without human consciousness, there is no world. It is the presence of human consciousness that brings meaning into the world. Without human beings in this world, conscious human beings in this world, in effect, there would not be a world.
That's right.
We bring the world into being through our consciousness. And through our consciousness, we create the world we live in. Out of the totality of reality, our consciousness cuts our world that fits itself. In other words, the kind of world you exist in reflects the kind of consciousness that you have. And notice, if you check.
I don't think y'all heard that. I don't think you heard it. That principle is exactly what I'm proposing. We need somebody to be over there, and in my case, Sierra Leone. This country is opening up the door. We have a president there that's saying, come back and build. I'm saying, yeah, but we need money. We can't build with no money. How the hell are we going to get something done? And I'm saying, hey, I got an idea. People invest in this idea. Send me this amount every month and let me put it into crypto. Let it blow up because the market's finna blow. They blowing up as we speak. I looked at it today. I made all kind of money. I ain't did nothing there, but I made money. Now, if I had bigger money to work with, man, the turnover would be, we'd better go to Africa. And then with the exchange rate being 10,200 and something leons to every dollar, we could easily buy probably thousands of acres and have them developed easily. But it's up here in my mind, right? Now I got to get it out and get people to believe in it, get people to trust it. Just what he said. Whatever reality you want around you, you have to create it from your thoughts. And people, you can't get people to put up 30. How would I add that shit up to be? Let me see. 83 cents a day is what I'm asking people to give me. Give me 83 cents a day.
Change your consciousness or change your values and orientation. you enter into a different world. You interact with different people. People often that you didn't even know existed in the world.
Exactly.
Social situations that you might not have even recognized until you entered into a new level of consciousness.
A new level of consciousness.
You see people, say, for instance, who become addicted, say, to crack or something, and now enter into a whole world and enter into a whole social system that before they became addicted, they hardly noticed. They didn't know what it was all about. And they picked up new friends, new relations, whole new ways of acting, whole new purposes in life. They lost old friends, broke with old families, all kinds of things. In other words, the consciousness, that addicted consciousness, brought into the world a new foreground and put other things into the background. Therefore, man.
He just said, before I understood that Sierra Leone was offering us citizenship or offered to restore our citizenship if we can prove through DNA testing that we came from one of the tribes that's there. Before I knew that, my consciousness was totally different. I wasn't saying what I'm saying now. My whole plan, before I learned that 6 months ago, because I've only known about this 6 months. So before I knew about that, my whole plan was go to Ghana, get me a compound. I got 2 lots there, build a compound on one, and on the other build some rental units, and that'll be enough to sustain just me and my family, my soon-to-be family, whenever I find me a suitable mate. That's what I was thinking. But then after finding out about Sierra Leone and then actually going through the process, meeting the president, meeting with some of the people in the ministry and the cabinet, hooking up with the right folks and seeing the true potential of the land where my people were taken from, oh, it gave me a whole new paradigm shift. So now I'm like, you know what? Let me be the son to open the country up. The president is saying, come back, bring your money. We here. That literally can be the jewel of Africa. And somebody got to be the one to say this. We just so freaking stingy and uptight that we can't see. It's crazy.
Consciousness is a creative act.
A creative
and the
act.
kind of consciousness you have will determine the kind of world you create. Right. And consequently, when you look
Amen.
at the world that we live in, African people, we must recognize to a great extent it is a world of our own creation.
Yep.
It is a world that has been generated by the type of consciousness we've been permitted to be instilled in us.
Now listen to that. The reason on the bottom, collectively, not individually, collectively, worldwide, is because of the level of consciousness we have. When somebody asking me, the Lebanese is so powerful, no, they're not. They're only powerful because we go in there foolishly and give them our freaking money. If we practice race loyalty with our dollar, there's no way the Lebanese will be in West Africa doing nothing. You don't have to go in there and lay a hand on nobody. You ain't got to fight with them. You ain't got to argue with them. You ain't got to do none of that. All you got to do is keep walking with your money. And make sure when it leaves your hands, it touches somebody else's hand that look like yours. That's it. And we will form a new level of being in those countries because the Lebanese will get the picture. And they would pack and get to stepping. Simple. I don't understand why this is so hard for folks.
The people. As I told you earlier today on the radio, we talk about the white man as having power And I want you to recognize that power ultimately has to do with a relationship.
That's right.
Between people. And that the white man's so-called power is to a great extent based upon the nature of the relationship he has with the black man.
That's right. He has no power.
We empower him.
We give him power.
By the nature of our own behavior and attitudes as a people.
Did I just say that?
He cannot be, as I said earlier, what he is unless we are what we are. And I'm telling you, to a good
Amen.
extent, to a good extent, the European is our creation.
Yes.
All right. Yes.
And the Lebanese, the Chinese, and everybody else.
If we look at our behavior, we will see that to a good extent it is our behavior, our values, our conscience,
our lack of value,
the kind of personalities we've established in ourselves, our tastes, our desires and needs that maintains the European in this position.
And the Lebanese and the Chinese and
we
the
talk about
Indians.
The civil rights movement and the apartheid system of the South. When blacks decided just to get out of the buses and walk, the system changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they just stopped sitting behind the white crowd, just changing that relationship, changed the nature of power.
Yes, it did. It shifted the nature of power.
When they decided then to walk side by side, when they decided to walk abreast and line themselves up, because they had not walked that way before, for the ends before, the relationship changed. When they kept their monies in their pockets.
Listen to this.
When they sat on those stools and blocked the other people from them and changed the nature of the interactions between themselves and Europeans, the nature of the system changed. So therefore we have tremendous power. It depends upon how we align ourselves as a people and how we decide to relate.
We have tremendous power. Have I not been saying this? This ain't my words. This comes from the great. All we got to do is study the greats of history. They already gave us a blueprint for domination. And in a good way, where we don't have to hurt nobody. Make them go back to their own land where they come from and do business with their own people. And we do business with our people. We have tremendous power. And I said that before I left Africa. I was telling people this. There's no way these people can compete with us if we do what my man is saying, what the great doctor is saying. Vote with your money. Use your money as your consciousness. Promote your brothers and sisters on the continent who have these great ideas. They have to be backed up. You let these ideas die and go to the grave with them, and the people never get liberated. It ain't like people asking you for millions of dollars. In my case, I'm only asking for 83 cents a day. But for a lot of folks, they just will not do it. It seems like impossible to do these things, and it's not. We have tremendous power. Y'all just don't get it.
To other people in the world, because they cannot have what they have unless we are who we are. And that is why we don't have to spend a great deal of time always appealing to them and analyzing them, because we can better appeal to our own sense of self.
Our own sense of
and
self.
our own consciousness.
Our own consciousness.
And we waste a lot of time trying to transform them, when through transforming ourselves, they will be transformed.
We will transform. We the most dominant, we the original nation. I don't get it.
The power is in our hands.
See?
We are not destined to be the servants of white folk.
Or any other person.
The destiny of black folk. No way. And we have to change this idea, because many of us are still operating on that concept. As I said this morning, many of us go to these schools to become what? qualified to work for whom? For them.
For them.
Why do we assume that they're going to have the jobs for us? Yes. These people
Because we got the savior mentality.
Jobs for themselves.
They're going to save us.
The problems that the Europeans are facing today and the European economies are facing today is that they are not generating enough jobs for their own people.
Exactly.
And even though America is bragging about the millions of jobs it's creating, those jobs are part-time jobs. The bulk of them are part-time jobs.
How many are they eliminating?
And jobs that have little or no future.
Dead-end jobs.
So when people talk about creating jobs, you got to ask what kind.
What exactly?
Of jobs
what kind of
are
jobs
being created? That is why, of course, this system is not investing in black education.
Nope. The schools are actually closing here in the divided states.
Its employment structure.
The schools are closing, prisons are open.
From outside of the nation to be employed. You see, it even is hiring in the world itself, in other nations and other places.
Yeah, India.
Already, it has reached the point where its need for black males is pretty much saturated. And it literally then is warehousing us in the jails and prisons and provoking us to kill each other and to destroy each other right here in
They have no need for us because we give them that power.
Organizing the education of our children as if the white dad still had jobs waiting for them in multitudes. How different our education would be if we sent our children to school to create jobs for themselves. To create their own economic and political systems, to see themselves as the major sources of their employment. As I remarked earlier today while we were in the radio station, I heard something about some people out here protesting for jobs and pushing these other people for jobs. And I asked the question, do we know how many jobs we really create for other people?
Millions.
We are a job creating people.
Yes, we are, because we give our goddamn money.
Because we don't think in terms of nation. You see, we saw ourselves as a nation, we could see that we create jobs like any other nation. I mentioned that today. How many jobs are created by black music?
Millions.
Look at the whole structure of the music industry. From promoters to manufacturers of the records and the tapes and what have you, to the whole entertainment field, the Tower Records and the other great sellers of records and music and so forth, advertising that uses our music and all these things. How many thousands of jobs are we creating?
Off of our talent.
We're creating them, but they have them. You see? We sing the music, they sell it. We sing the music, they market it. We sing the music, they promote it. You see? We sing the music, they produce great conglomerates like Sony, CBS Music, creating all kinds of jobs. We're creating tremendous jobs for a lot of people. How many jobs do we create just buying from Koreans?
Literally fucking millions.
Other ethnic groups out here. How many people are we creating employment for in terms of our spending habits?
How many of them we send their kids to school?
As a people. How many jobs are we creating going to jail? We're creating all kinds of jobs and wealth.
Judges, lawyers, prosecutors, bailiffs,
we are creating
stenographers.
Jobs, and yet we are begging for jobs.
Begging these people.
This means that somewhere our consciousness has been impaired.
Yes. They've exploited.
We're begging for what we are making already.
It's crazy.
We use our own creations as a source.
We can't even benefit from our own power.
I told you earlier today that the Creator could not have intended for us as African people
no
to be a poor people.
No.
If the Creator implanted in our soils all of the
wealth of the fucking world in the soil of Africa, and we not taking advantage of it.
We talk about the minerals and the oil and the gold and the this and the that that's implanted in African soil. So it seems as if the Creator blessed us from the very beginning.
Yes, He did.
With wealth and possibility.
And the fertile soil.
Therefore, for us to be going hungry over this wealth and to be starving in the midst of it and to be perceived as a dependent, indebted people while our wealth is being shipped out to other people. We are actually selling a lot of it.
Yes, we are.
For pennies.
For pennies on the dollar.
And dimes and less means that there is something wrong with our consciousness.
What's wrong with our consciousness is melanated
because
African
ultimately,
people.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've said what? That the wealth of a people is ultimately not in their land. But where is it? In the mind. The wealth of man is in his mind, in his consciousness.
Where? Where's your wealth at, people? It ain't in Europe. It ain't in America. It's in here. This is your wealth.
I mentioned the example of Japan. No mineral wealth to speak of whatsoever.
None.
Nothing at all. A nation, by the way, which is totally dependent.
Totally.
Of course, we get things backwards, don't we? We see ourselves as depending on Europeans when the reality is the other way around. When they depend on us and our soils and our people, we have to be backwards in order for this situation to be.
Yes, we are. We are backwards people. We must admit it. We are backwards people.
And we have to live in an almost permanent state of deception in order to be used the way we are used.
For the length of time.
The Japanese must depend on others.
You hear what he said? In order for us to be in this position, we pretty much got to fix it in our minds that it's okay for us to be used. It's okay for us not to take advantage of the mineral resources in the soil in Africa. We make excuses, right? Why we can't have. And everything is right there in front of us. It's on our feet. It's under our feet. Food is falling off the tree, but yet we're going hungry. It's literally millions of acres ain't even touched yet. I've seen it. Some of that land, you could tell, ain't nobody even walked through it before, probably since the dawn of Earth. So many mineral resources, it'll blow your freaking mind. But guys like me who want to get out here and get it done, can't get the community to support. You can't. And then the paid informants and the not paid informants are gonna show up and derail the whole freaking movement like they do every single time. Anytime a brother step up and want to do something to liberate people, here come the agents. Most of them look like this. Paid and unpaid. And they're going to get in, start with their little nitpicking and this and that, and oh, you going to do it. And the rest of the people follow right on with the Pied Piper back down to the alley. And they dissipate the energy, and nothing ever gets done. We continue to be on the bottom of the totem pole globally. This is what they do, people. This is how they perpetually keep us apart. And we're like children. We're perpetual children. We let them do it. I'm Nigerian. I'm this. I'm Ghanaian. I'm from the Congo. And that we test our blood is similar. We need to be erasing all that and joining together, us against them, whoever them are. We give away our power. We supposed to be running this planet. This is our planet. We just asleep at the wheel right now. And we need brothers to keep sounding the alarm, but we need basically thousands of guys like me. Thousands of guys like that we're gonna do something. I can go somewhere and retire and be cool, comfortable, but I think it'd eat at me knowing I could have done more. God has blessed me with the talents to do these things, but unfortunately, haven't been blessed with the money. That's why I'm thinking of, okay, if I get the people to join in, I could go lay the groundwork and then the cavalry will come and we can finish building. Somebody got to be the one to do the initial groundwork. Somebody has to thrust forth the vision. And I'm not asking for millions of folks. I'm asking for a little money. And I know I'm going to have pushback. I already know that. That's why I'm going to keep addressing it. You're going to have pushback. That's why I decided to play Amos tonight. Because I know a lot of people don't even know who he is, don't know the concept, ain't going to get the book, ain't going to sit up in here and try to talk. Shut your fucking mouth unless you know what the hell you're talking about. Don't come here with them trivial ass idiotic ideas and ain't gonna never do nothing. I've been on this earth long enough to see people how they react and what they do. Most people just come in, say some little stupid stuff, and they go. They never actually do anything. Let me get off my soapbox and let's get back to the lecture.
Vital resources, their oil, their timber, all of these things that they use to create their technology and so forth is taken from the soils of other people and then sold back to them.
Yeah, I got your number. I know it's in my email.
And yet they are seen as rich.
Send it to me again just to make sure.
And the people whose wealth they take or buy are seen as poor and poverty stricken. Ultimately, then, you cannot rob or take from wealth from a what? Poor people. You cannot get wealth from a poverty-stricken people who have nothing you can get nothing from.
Exactly.
So if you're getting all your diamonds and your gold and your magnesium and all this other stuff, then from African people, then African people must be what? Wealthy and rich.
Wealthy as hell.
And therefore, if African people are poverty-stricken with this material wealth, then it must be because our consciousness as a people is impoverished.
Whoa.
And we are suffering then an impoverishment.
That's kind of heavy.
As we said before, if you have a good mind, you can con another joker out of his land. You can con him out of his diamond and his gold. And this is what the other people have done. They have used their mind and their cleverness and taken from us what they did not have originally. And therefore, consciousness is not an abstract concept. It is not a theoretical concept. It is a concept that is directly related to the reality that one lives in and to the reality that one experiences. It is directly related to the type of life that one will live and does live. So I'm going to look at this for a minute, particularly the consciousness of Africans in America. I'm often somewhat amused and taken aback by the number of people in this society who claim that slavery occurred somewhere back there. That, and you had some
like it stopped at some point. Like it's still going on right now.
That slavery no longer influences the nature of African people. I wonder what those people have to conserve in the first place. Are they conserving power? They're conserving wealth? What does a black conservative conserve? You know, you have to conserve something. And since they have very little, if anything, they must only be conserving the system that has created their poverty to begin with. And you see them ultimately justifying the poverty of African people and justifying the political and social and economic subordination of African people in the name of some kind of higher principles.
Now, that earlier, the Jamaican brother was saying that the Lebanese are so powerful. No, they're not. They're not that powerful. The only reason why they're powerful because we have an impoverished mind collectively from around the world. If we didn't have an impoverished mind as a collective, as a global African community, if we didn't have an impoverished mind, there's no way that these other nations can be in West Africa making a penny. They have no power, period. And the brother came in here and said that, how powerful they are. And they have no power. The only power they have, we actually give it to them. Every day we walk in there with our freaking money and buy whatever it is we buy from them. If we didn't do that, they wouldn't have zero.
So slavery is not supposed, the experience of slavery is not supposed to be operating in the mentality of black folk. You hear a lot of our youngsters who say that as well. How do you talk about slavery? That was back there. Or white stuff. Well, that was back there. We don't have anything to do with that anymore. You see. And it's an amazing situation because you have to remind them that you're still living off the interest of the wealth that your forefathers earned.
That's right.
From slavery.
Stolen.
You're still enjoying the accumulated wealth that began with the enslavement of our people.
Yep.
And if you're going to enjoy the wealth that was generated by evil, then you must take the curse that comes along with it.
Yes. Yes.
And therefore, even though you personally had nothing to do with it, but because you have received stolen goods, you must pay the price.
You go to jail too. Try to receive some stolen goods, you're going to jail.
That's because you fight and struggle to protect those stolen goods.
Yeah.
And you defend them. And you organize your society and your relationships with our people to maintain them and to continue to enhance them, then you must pay the price.
Absolutely.
That's why you live in terror.
That's why they're fearful of us.
These streets. That's why you're going to suffer, no matter how good you are, no matter how liberal you are. Ladies and gentlemen, when we behave as adults,
you hear that? If we behave as adults,
our behavior will be visited upon our children, and that our children pay for our misbehavior.
Yep.
As we say, an act does not end at the point of its occurrence.
No, it don't.
It continues to reverberate into the future and down across the generations. And that's why when you behave in a particular way, you have to think in terms of 7 generations from your behavior.
From this behavior.
What you're going to do.
The thing we're doing now or not doing is going to be affected for the next 7 generations.
And even though those children may
That's why I said about legacy. What is your fucking legacy? Why are you here?
This country.
What are you going to be known for when you pass away? Are 7 generations going to know who you were? No, because you don't do nothing.
And while they have enjoyed that treasure, ultimately their children will have to pay the taxes or will have to pay the price.
That's right.
So we have a bunch of people out here who think they can rape and rob the world and think that they could have enslaved the world and think then that they're going to sleep well at night.
They should be
fearful. It doesn't work that way.
One day we might wake up and decide to become adults.
That slavery was back then and had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with them. Ladies and gentlemen, we've never escaped slavery.
No. We still got an enslaved mind.
The slave consciousness.
As a collective.
of our great-great-grandparents. We are of the same mind to a great extent
Yeah.
that they were. We have not advanced
Nope.
beyond these people. How can I say that?
Easy.
I generally ask a series of questions. You say that slavery has nothing to do with you and slavery was back there. And I ask you the question then, what language do you speak?
English, French, Spanish.
When did you learn that language? Was that the
Portuguese,
language African people were speaking
German,
when we were taken into slavery
Dutch?
in America? In other words, the language we speak at this moment is what? A slave language.
A slave language.
The language that our slave ancestors were forced to learn. And we still speak it, and you can still hear the pidgin, the Creole, and the other kinds of stuff in our language right at this moment
Yep.
that they had to go through. That language, with its words defined by history and by an experience, is the language we use today to guide our behavior. It's the language we use today to talk to ourselves. It's the language we use today to learn about ourselves and to learn about the world. It's the language today we use to try to understand ourselves. Is there no wonder then that we are still confused?
Yep.
So we have not escaped slavery because we are still using a slave language.
That's
and
right.
we speak the language of slaves.
We haven't created a new language
What
that
kind
the
of food
global
do you
African
eat?
population can speak.
You say soul food? Was that the food of African people?
I did like
Slave
Jules
food.
Malema said that we should
The
learn
food that we find most satisfying, the food that we find that sticks to our ribs, the food that we call down home,
Kiswahili.
a food that we learn to eat in the quarters. And yet we dare say that we have escaped slavery.
No.
That we have nothing to do with those people back there. That was back there. When our whole very social life and social relationships, our very definition of ourselves as a people, our very attempt to commune with ourselves is mediated by the food of slaves.
Yes, it is. We
Understand
break
what I'm
bread
trying to
with each
get at?
other. We break bread with each other
And
with
how can you
slave
say that you
food.
exist in a different consciousness from another people? What kind of uniforms are we wearing? Huh? What kind of clothes?
What kind of clothes are we wearing?
Were these the clothes of African people?
What are you wearing?
This is
Shall
what we
you
got to
see
look
me?
at. Yes. What is this to say that
You
we
see it?
escaped slavery? What kind of
Africa.
name?
These are the clothes
Do
you're
we
supposed to be
respond to?
wearing. Represent.
Yes.
Supposed to represent your fucking race.
Tamikas and all these
And be
other
proud
things
of
that
it.
go
Go
on out here.
everywhere.
What kind of names do we identify with? Why is it that African names sound strange to us now
Don't sound strange to me.
as a people, and yet we dare say that we
I got
have a
3
different
African
consciousness
names.
from our great slave grandparents? How can we say that?
We're
We're still
2
the same
and
country.
Arabic name.
And we are still in the same position because we are still servants of the white man. And our reason for being in America is to serve white folk
Yep.
and to generate wealth for them. And there has been no change at all in terms of
None.
ownership to these people.
Because anytime we raise up a true son of Africa anywhere, these paid agents and non-paid agents to bring them down.
That we pursue are slave values and the values of servants. The social relations
We don't
that we
protect
create and interact
our
with
saviors. We don't.
were built to change the slave consciousness, this consciousness of servitude that is still too much with us today. And ultimately, we ask the question that's closest to home for a lot of people. when we claim that we've escaped slavery.
Yeah,
slavery
right.
was something back there which had nothing to do with us today. And then I ask you the question, what kind of God do you worship?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Say what? What you say, doctor? What you say, doctor?
What's the name of it? Who taught you to praise him? Was this the God you were praying to before you were brought to these shores?
Ah,
Was this the religion you had before you were brought to these shores?
ah.
Can you name one African God?
Most people
How
can't.
can you then define yourself, the very essence of yourself, and the very essence of your soul, and organize the very nature of your life here on earth, based on a God handed to us by our slave masters, claim that you have no slave consciousness and are not related to slavery? In other words, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are not Africans.
I
We are
am.
possessed by spirits and demons.
He said, because we don't act like it, we're not Africans. And I said, I am. That's the reason why I returned. And that's the reason why I'm going to be spearheading the movement to bring more people back. But we got to bring them back to something. Right now, there's nothing to bring them back to. We got to build everything. Those societies are not set up to welcome large number of us back. They're not. I've been there. I see. There's no infrastructure that's going to be able to hold a large amount, a large contingency of us coming back. So whatever we want to do, we got to bring it there. The ideas got to come with us, and we got to build it there. The infrastructure, the houses, the roads, the bridges, we got to build it all. This work. Who gonna fund it? We always leave out the freaking money. That's why I'm harping on it. We always leave out the money. Who gonna fund it? You know your enemies ain't gonna fund it. We gotta do it.
We have let another people's spirit take possession of our bodies and take possession of our minds. When we speak, it is not with our African voice. It is with the voice of that demonic presence that uses our lips to speak its own language. Yes. Yes, and we have to recognize this. We are possessed. And if we are to transform ourselves and to transform the nature of our relationship with those who are our masters, we must engage in an exorcism and clear the devils out of our minds.
Yeah, how do you get the devil out of your freaking spirit?
And at this time, then, it'll pay you to read a little bit about demonic possession.
Yeah.
We have to be demonically possessed. Because if we talk about black on black violence, self-defeating behavior, self-destructive behavior, then we could not be possessed by a beautiful and wonderful God. We must be possessed by a demon. It's interesting to look at the literature on possession. We have a couple of types of possession. One is called a somnambulistic.
Let me deal with DJ Jamaican. Listen, fam. Let me explain something to you. If it breaks out tomorrow, so what? We've been here 400 years fighting the white man with no aid and assist from no African nation, no Caribbean nation. We've been here fighting them to a standstill on our own. So don't come to me with this, we might be forced to leave in a hurry. We've been here fighting. We ain't went nowhere. They ain't exterminated us. I don't think you're looking at it clearly, bro. We've been here with no aid and assist, no arms, no finances, fighting the white man to a standstill for 400 years. So don't come to me talking about what we gonna do and we gotta run, and we ain't gotta do nothing if we don't want to. Ain't no African nation sent a penny over here to help us in liberation in this country. I don't think you know what you're talking about, man. In all due respect.
Possession. Somnambulistic. Soma, in this instance, having to do with sleep. You hear it in the word somninex. You know, ambulistic, to move around. Ambulatory.
Yeah, we ain't dead,
right?
though.
So we're talking about people who are what? Sleepwalking. They're not awake, but they're walking around. The body is moving and it is walking in an organized fashion and walking systematically, but the person is still asleep. And in somnambulistic possession, then, the individual's original self has been repressed and displaced, and the spirit, and he identifies with the spirit that possesses him. And his I and the spirit's I are one and the same. We have a lot of that here today. We have the spirit that has been implanted in us. We have taken to be us, and we've identified with it. That is why in defending ourselves, we end up defending the people who rule over us. In defending our ego, we end up maintaining the social structure that has destroyed our ego to begin with. And you see it in our youngsters who will fight and kill in the name of respect, and fight because their egotistic orientation has been insulted. And therefore, in defending their ego, they do not kill the people who destroyed their ego. They kill each other and maintain the ones who destroyed them in the first place in power. And that's why the subtitle of my book, Black on Black Violence, was Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. We are killing each other in order to maintain this system. We have let ourselves become possessed by a spirit such that when we become aggressive, we aggress against the self instead of those who are the source of our aggressive orientation. We talk a lot as a people about self-hatred. Self-hatred is a personality configuration. It is a form of personality organization. It is an orientation toward the world and toward oneself. Self-hatred, then, is the white man's greatest protection against being destroyed by the black man. To a good extent, self-hatred is the white man's defense mechanism. Is the white man's form of self-defense. How can we say that? To a great extent, one function of the personality is to direct energy, to direct aggression, to channel aggression and energy and wishes and impulses in particular directions, to organize feelings, to organize energy to achieve certain ends. Those things that we hate, often then when we are angry or hostile, we aggress against them.
Yes.
We attack them often. we destroy them, then we have a problem, don't we? If we attack the things we hate, if we attack the things toward which we hold hostility, when we are overly frustrated and when we are angry, then what happens if that thing we hate is ourselves?
Whoa.
It means then, ladies and gentlemen, that when we become frustrated and angered as a people, when we are overwrought by feelings of hostility, and our self-hating personality seeks to channel that hostility and channel that aggression, it's going to channel the aggression right back on to the self. Because that's the thing we hate most.
Yeah.
So consequently, black anger then becomes a conduit for black self-destruction, for black self-defeat. The object of our hostile, aggressive feelings becomes ourselves.
That's right.
And you can see then how the white man is protected by that personality structure, right?
Yes, he is.
While he stokes our anger, while he stokes our hostility, while he stokes our frustration, while we get mad and we want to strike out, when we decide to strike out and aggress, we strike out and aggress against the self. And by doing so, he is left untouched and unscathed.
Unscathed.
And therefore, our self-hatred becomes his principal means of defending himself.
That's right.
And of maintaining himself. One of the things that frightened him most about the Ferguson case was that Ferguson's self-hatred mechanism broke down. Unlike many deaf, dumb, and blind Negroes, he knew who his enemies were. And so when he got angry and hostile, instead of going out to drink himself to death, instead of going out to smoke crack and destroy himself, instead of going out to killing someone who looked like himself, instead of going out to commit suicide and put himself in a place to be destroyed by somebody else, he went directly to the source of his frustration.
That's right. Go right to the freaking source.
And this is what frightened those people. They were wondering how many more are there like that, and are they increasing? Yes. So you can see why the seed of self-hatred is planted in the minds of the black man.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time about what it does to us, but we got to look at it because I've told you before, every maladaptive characteristic in the black psyche is there for white folk. And it's not purely there because they hate you, or they misunderstand you, or they don't know who you were. It has nothing to do with all of that. I tell people when you analyze the so-called aberrations in the black personality, you must always ask the question, what are their social functions and roles? Who benefits from this aberration in the black man's mind? What are the social and political and economic benefits, and for whom? Who gains from this particular orientation in our minds? And then you begin to see why it's there and what its function is. And so every complaint we have about ourselves has a political, economic, and social intent beneficial to white folk and detrimental to ourselves.
That's right.
And that means then, somewhere along the way, we became possessed by these orientations. And they were implanted in our personalities. We have come to identify with them as our natural selves, as our natural orientations. We have assumed that they represent who we are.
Yeah.
And we have now then found many ingenious ways to defend the demons that possess us.
Yep.
And ultimately then, those demons destroy us and have us destroy others like ourselves. There's another form of possession we call lucid possession. In this sense, the person at least has a sense of self, and they have the sense that there's another spirit in them. And they struggle with that spirit, sometimes losing the battle every now and then. They become obsessed with their struggle with the spirit. And in a sense then are disenabled by that struggle. So some of us are in that state. We're not quite satisfied with the identity we have. We know somehow that there's a deeper African self in us. We're also aware that there's Eurocentrically implanted demon in us.
Yes.
And we wrestle with
Negro
it daily. There's another type of possession we talk about here, and that's spontaneous. What has sort of occurred spontaneously against our will. This is in contrast to one we talk about as artificial, one deliberately created. What do we mean by that? When we go into a particular social setting, such as a church or such as a rock concert or the like, and we go through a set of rituals and behaviors.
Rituals.
We go there and go through these behaviors and rituals and songs and dance as a mean of deliberately being possessed by what? The Spirit.
Yeah. And
having our bodies taken over and being possessed. And then we say, we feel what? The Spirit. We feel the Spirit living within us.
That's right.
And so consequently, much of our life is about provoking through artificial means spirits which take over us and assume control of our behavior.
Which is destructive.
Latent possession means when we are possessed and we don't even know.
Don't even know it. Don't care to know.
And I think that defines a lot of us.
Yep.
What is split within the personality. They and their possessing spirit are one and the same. And when you try to
that way they can talk on both sides of
their possessive
yes,
spirit,
no. I'm gonna do this, I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna do this, I'm not gonna do it. They talk out both sides of their mouth. Two spirits
that possess us.
Possessing one body.
Let's be a little more concrete, and I want to just give you an example of what I mean.
Well, I'm coming to Africa with you.
In the literature, we talk about these.
How long was the plane ride though?
The incubi and the succubi. Spirit that lies in the body or lies on the body, the incubus, and the one that lies under the spirit, the succubus. When we talk about this spirit, though, that possesses us, when we talk about this spirit that the European implanted in us in terms of the language, in terms of the food, in terms of the religion, in terms of the values, in terms of the social relations, in terms of the name, we are talking about a spirit that does not a spookish entity in ourselves. It actually incarnates in us. What do we talk when we talk about incarnate? We are dealing with the Latin root carnes, which has to do with what? Meat, flesh.
Right.
In other words, the spirit comes to dwell in our very flesh and comes to sculpt our very bodies. And therefore, the spirit is a physical thing as much as it is a psychological thing. The bodies that we have tonight, ladies and gentlemen, are bodies that have been created by the European experience and are not our natural bodies as African people. Just as the surface of our bodies reflect the influence of another people, the very internal nature and the physiology of our bodies reflect those people as well. That's why when you get rid of them, you're going to have a healing experience.
Exactly. You go through a whole metamorphosis of
Your body will
experiences.
change. I read
That's why I'm sick that I
Let
gotta
me
come
read
back
it again,
here.
I think, in this context.
I'm literally angry that I gotta come
This
back.
is most dramatic, and the things I'm talking about are most dramatic when we study the so-called multiple personality. And let me read you a description here that was printed in the Times. And those who might be familiar with it, indulge me here, because I think it points out to something. It begins, when Timmy drinks orange juice, he has no problem. But Timmy is just one of close to a dozen personalities who alternate control over a patient with multiple personality disorder. And if those other personalities drink orange juice, the result is a case of hives. What are we saying here? We got one body, but depending on what consciousness possesses that body will react to the drinking of orange juice with or without hives. It will break out in blisters. So if it drinks orange juice when one of the other personalities is possessing it, welts and hives will break out right there.
Yep.
If Timmy comes back, if the new consciousness comes back and takes over this body, the hives will disappear almost on the moment. In other words, then, there's a different body for a different consciousness. It goes on to say then that medical disorders that are found to differ from one sub-personality to another. In other words, even though these so-called personalities possess the same so-called body, each personality has a different order of illnesses associated with it. Each personality is vulnerable to a particular type of ailment, one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we talking about? We are saying that each consciousness, which is represented by each personality, creates its own body.
Creates its own body.
Creates its own physiology. And thereby creates its own vulnerability to various ailments and so forth. You see, you get people in medical school who try to teach you that disease only occurs as a result of some kind of viral syndrome or some kind of entry into the body of some bacteria or other thing. And certainly that is a part of it.
Yes.
And certainly there's reality there. But the body must interact with the viruses and must interact with the disease entity. And this is what we talk about when we talk about the immune system, that health is not necessarily the absence of the disease, but the capacity of the body to resist the disease, to stand up against the disease.
That's why they poison our water and our food.
And so consequently then, when these bodies are taken over by different personalities, these personalities apparently change the nature of the immune system of those bodies, making them vulnerable to diseases when one personality is present and not so when another is present. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, then, that the nature of the consciousness which possesses us as persons will to a degree determine the illnesses to which we are vulnerable as a person and as people. And a lot of the illnesses, physical and other diseases that we suffer then, are mediated by the nature of the consciousness that we've permitted to possess us as a people. So to a great extent, the defeat of disease, the maintaining of health, must not only be pursued in terms of discovering new drugs and these kinds of things, but must involve self-discovery and self-knowledge.
So to heal yourself, you have to have self-knowledge.
That in people with multiple personalities, there is a strong psychological separation between each sub-personality. Each will have his own name and age. Does that strike a bell? What did we say earlier? To what names do we respond? Are they the same names to which we responded prior to slavery? So in other words, as we got the new slave personality, we got what? New names. Yes, yes, yes.
You know, due to their
And we were
shenanigans.
changed. To a good extent, our names were given us to designate our new consciousness and our new situation. Each will have his own name and age, and often some specific memories and abilities. In other words, each personality has its own history, has its own biography, has its own memory. And you look at Negroes where they have a certain consciousness and look at the history they remember. Look at the things that they keep in their memories and look at the histories they study and identify them. Look at them fight African history. Yes. Look at them want to identify with the history of Europeans. Look at them wanting to define themselves in terms of that history. And look at them having memories only for that history. Look at those Africans who are still under the possessive influence of the European implanted spirit and know that they have little or no knowledge of African history, and therefore little or no knowledge of their own history as a person and an individual. So there's a consistency between the consciousness and the history that a person has and the memory that an individual has. They frequently, for example, personalities differ in handwriting, artistic talent, or even in knowledge of foreign languages. Speak a different language, depending on the personality that's in there. Multiple personalities typically develop in people who were severely and repeatedly abused as children, apparently as a means to protect themselves against the pain of abuse. Does that strike another note in you? Often only one or two of the subpersonalities will be conscious of the abuse, while the others would have no memory or experience of the pain. To a great extent, the personality of the African American today has been shaped by our desires to escape the memory of the slave experience, to deny its existence. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to come in terms with it. We don't want to re-experience it psychologically. We don't want to know about it. And therefore, our lives becomes defined by eternal escape and avoidance of reality and of history and of a knowledge of who we are and how we came to be who and what we are. And consequently, we cannot act upon the reality of our history, and we guide our behavior and define ourselves in terms of a fantasy as history and a misinterpretation of reality. This is what it is. About Star Trek, and we talk about the time warp that Star Trek depicts quite frequently, of how people move from one state of consciousness and one world and are suddenly flipped into a new world. They go through a warp, and suddenly, all of a sudden, everything that they used to use to guide themselves no longer counts. The language that they used to speak can no longer be understood in the new world. The values that they used to guide their behavior are no longer workable. In fact, it gets them into trouble. The gods, the culture, the nature of the social relations, and all of the things that they used prior to meeting the warp no longer suffice. Now they must learn new values and new behaviors and new orientations in order to adapt themselves to the new universe that they live in. We are in that kind of position today.
Yeah, we
Think
are.
about the African in the world the African lived in prior to being brought across the oceans. Think about the gods we praise. Think about the organization of our society. Think about the languages that we spoke, the food that we ate, the dress that we wore, the music, the song, the dance, and all of those things that defined us as African people. And think how horrendous it must have been for us to be thrown into this world where there was a whole new language, a whole new social hierarchy, a whole new set of authorities. People pushing you around who you don't understand. People who are putting strange tools in your hands. People who are trying to get you to relate to them and to relate to each other in a very different kind of way from what you're used to relating to. Think about the stress and the confusion, and think about the abuse. Think about the horror of that situation our parents and great-grandparents were put in. And there was somebody that said then, if you pray to this God, if you talk this way, if you dress this way, if you relate this way, you'll get a greater sense of security. Your anxiety will be reduced. You will feel good, and you'll be able to withstand the pain of your existence. And the God then that I'm going to hand you is one that I have created for you. And a theology that comes with it is one that I have created so that you will continue to serve me as you continue to serve it. And we come to believe in the veracity of that God and that religion. Why? Because we feel so secure when we follow it. And we feel so relieved when we follow it. And yet we wonder why, despite all of our prayers, despite all of our devotion, we still suffer the way we do. I often ask the question, why is it that the people who pray the most have the most of their children in the jails of America today?
Come on now, Doc.
Who shout and kick over the benches and so forth, are filling up the prisons and have the children killing each other and addicted out here in these streets. There must be a problem here, ladies and gentlemen. We must reorient ourselves to our religion. We must reorient ourselves to our gods, because apparently we don't have the appropriate orientation. Because as that book you read says, you can tell a tree by what? The fruit it bears. And therefore, if it bears bitter fruit, or if it bears no fruit at all, the God you worship says it is but fit to be hewn down and thrown into the flame and consumed. Read your own Bible. It gives you a very practical measure as to whether the religion you're pursuing is an appropriate one. And that measure says, look at the fruit that it bears. And if then the kind of religion and the God you're pursuing ends up having your sons in the jails of America, and ends up maintaining African people in slavery and servitude in their own lands and everywhere, then something is wrong in terms of how we relate to that religion and that God, because the outcome is wrong, and the outcome is destructive. And it's because we don't want to confront the abuse that we went through and deal with. You see, when you go through that time warp, the only way you can ultimately come to understand the new world is to understand what happened when you went through that warp that transformed what? The personality, that made the personality what it was. And I find that interesting when further over, when I read here of what happens when the personality moves from one personality to another, when the body is possessed by one personality and that personality is displaced and another one comes in. It says during the switch, there is typically a period of seconds or even minutes when heart rate, breath rate, and other physiological markers showing disorganization that is followed by a new pattern typical of the personality that is emerging. In other words, then we go through a period of disorganization and stress, and then the personality is reorganized to fit into the new circumstances. We can't continue to pursue this, but it's interesting to look at the changes in blood pressure that each personality brings about. The other kinds of changes, physical changes that are representative of the personality. So what are we saying here then? That each personality has its own name, its own history, its own memory, biography, way of speaking, language, way of thinking, way of perceiving itself, its own vulnerabilities. Each personality generates its own life space and generates its own types of social relations. Each personality has its own taste and appetite and its own morality. So to a great extent then, if we look at the problems and issues that confront us today as African people and see those issues in terms of the consciousness, we would recognize that we must rid ourselves of the consciousness that's been implanted in us by our European masters. One other thing I want to bring about in this situation, we notice that if you engage people in behavior therapy and you scan their brains and look at how their brains metabolize energy, there's a relationship between the areas of the brain that are rapidly using energy and the type of mental activity a person is undergoing and the type of physical behavioral activity the person is undergoing. Each personality, each type of orientation has a blueprint in the brain in terms of the various areas of the brain that are functionally relating one to the other. And it's interesting to note, for instance, that we look at something called the obsessive compulsive personality, the person who cannot stop repeating a particular behavior, no matter how irrational it may be, the person who must wash their hands every 30 minutes, even if they are not dirty, but who are compelled to the point that they wash their hands to the point of rawness because they cannot stop, is this kind of person. The person who is absorbed by a particular type of image, by a particular kind of thought or orientation that they cannot get out of their minds. This is what we talked about when we talked about the obsessive compulsive personality, a rigid, repetitive personality. We note then, if you scan the brains of these personalities, that certain areas in their brain are intensely active. For instance, we talked about their frontal lobes, the so-called orbital lobe of the brain, the orbital cortex of the brain, the part of the cortex that is above the eyes, the part of the cortex that concerns itself with intentionality and purpose and direction and motivation, and the connection of that cortex to the lower brain, to the what we call the caudate nucleus, that part of the lower brain that deals with repetitive behavior, that deals with monitoring, that deals with modulating behavior, that deals with, in its connection with the hypothalamus, with the thalamus, with senses, with the distribution of the senses, and with organizing the senses. When we look then at the compulsive personality, we notice that these areas are intensely active, and active in a way that they maintain the symptoms of that personality. It has been shown then that when these people take a drug such as Prozac, the intensity of and they respond to them in a way that their symptoms are relieved, the intensity of interaction between these three brain areas is decreased or delayed. It has also been noted then that you can put these same types of people through behavior therapy. That is, by changing the nature of the social relationship between the therapist and the patient, changing the nature of the rewards and punishments that the patient undergoes in an effort to change the patient's behavior, by changing the way the patient thinks about what is in their mind, thinks about the problems that they're in. And when you can successfully then reduce the symptoms of the compulsive disorder through this social conditioning, we note too the same kinds of physiological brain changes that occurs with the intake of the drug occurs with the intake of social training. Now, what are we saying then? Yes, that too, but what we're saying ultimately then is that the nature of the consciousness and the nature of the experience of the individual physically transforms the brain and physically transforms the way the brain operates. And therefore, when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about something that is real. We're talking about something that transforms both the psyche and the body. One of the things that you note when the individual is possessed, that the facial muscles change and that the body itself changes in a way that it literally incarnates and represents the nature of the spirit that is possessing the individual. So to a good extent, if you're in certain religions, you can tell what particular spirit is possessing the person by the very nature of the behavior that the individual is exhibiting, right, and the very shape of their very physiological body and their face. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, once we get the spirits of these demons that the Europeans have implanted in our bodies, our faces and our bodies themselves will be transformed.
Yep.
To a great
you can see it on people's face.
A lot of the way we look and a lot of the way we have organized ourselves physically is a result of the type of consciousness that we have.
Yep.
To a great extent, and I will begin to wrap it up here, to a great extent, the kind of consciousness that inhabits us reflects the kind of culture that we live in.
Yep.
The nature of the culture that we are a part of. Recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that culture cannot exist outside of our minds and of our bodies. Culture does not exist out there. History does not exist out there. History and culture can only exist in the minds and bodies of people. If there were no people in the world,
culture,
there would be in the world no culture in the world. Culture does not stand outside and direct us. It is where? Inside of us. And it directs
us. It's your church. It's your mosque. It's your culture. It's your history. It's all inside your body.
And in our minds. And we have to keep that in mind. Because sometimes we tend to see it as something
That's why I love to go places
from ourselves.
I want to see the stuff with my eyes.
Culture indwells in us. And it inhabits our bodies. Our history dwells in us. And it inhabits our bodies. We reflect our history. And we reproduce our history when that history becomes a part of us and is one with us. We tend to see culture in terms of music, in terms of the kind of dance we have, in terms of the songs we sing. And that is a part of culture. But ultimately, culture is deeper than that. Culture is a way of thinking. Ultimately, culture is a conspiracy. That is, it is a means by which a group of people organize the way they think, organize the way they believe, organize the way they see the world, so as to create a consciousness by which they can cooperate in achieving certain ends, so that they can mutually aid each other and gain ends that they cannot gain as separate individuals. So culture is an instrument of power. The individual through culture extends his power, and the culture extends the power of the group. When we talk about music and song and dance, what we are talking about here then is how culture ultimately comes to be implanted in our bodies. You see, we tend to look at song and dance and music as entertainment. And this is a serious mistake. We have a lot of our youth out there looking at music as mere entertainment. When we say that we are being enculturated, it means that a spirit is being implanted in us by the culture. It means our group is instilling in our bodies and in our minds a possessing spirit such that when our culture calls our name, we respond to it. When our culture is in need of defense and support, we then defend it and support it
right.
because we are at one with it.
That's right.
In other words, why does the black man respond to the white man? Why does the black man serve the white man? Why does everything the black man do benefit the white man? Why does the black man say freedom is doing what I want to do? And why is it that everything he wants to do enriches the European? Why is it that our youth say that they are being free, that they're doing what they want to do, and they're expressing themselves, and it involves buying a $100 pair of sneakers for white folks? Yes. Yes. All of this kind of stuff. Why? Because the spirit that is implanted in the human mind and in the human psyche is there to only respond to its creator and to its master. And therefore, when you let another people generate a spirit in you, when you let another people generate certain values in you, when you let another people generate a certain look, generate a certain reality for you, when you let another people let you see yourself in a particular sort of way and see your own people in a particular sort of way, they have implanted a spirit, and that spirit has been created by them, and that spirit only responds to them. And it only responds to them in terms of furthering their interests and working against the interests of the body it possesses. And this is why there's that self-destructive spirit in us. Because the demon that possesses a body is not there for that body. It is there for the creator that placed it there. And if necessary to obey its creator, it destroys that body. It will destroy the body it inhabits. The taste that that spirit has will be taste that can only be satisfied by buying from its master creator. The values that that spirit wishes to satisfy and realize can only be realized by going through the aegis of the master that created it. That is why every value and every taste and every desire and every need that provokes us, every one of these things that we seek to desire, ends up having us going through white folk. And that's why we think we need them. And every time we satisfy them, they in some way benefit in our seeking satisfaction. Because the demon that we call ourselves is answering to the call of its master. So a culture creates its own possessing spirits and enculturates and inculcates those spirits into the bodies of its members, so that those members, in defending their own egos, in defending their own interests, in defending what they perceive as their own needs, in satisfying their own tastes, in satisfying their own values, satisfy the needs of the culture, enrich the culture, empower the culture, defend the culture, advance the interests of the culture. And how then does the culture implant its spirit into its members? It does it in a very strong and primordial way. it uses vehicles. And one of the major vehicles that's used is music, rhythm, song, dance. A culture involves people moving what? Together, in tandem, in rhythm. It involves them having the same temporal sense, the same kind of time clock, so that they can move in synchrony, one with the other. And music is about synchrony. Poetry is about synchrony. Song is about synchrony. Music is about symbols. And you see, ultimately, it is through symbols that you evoke behavior from people. So when a culture creates symbols, those symbols are designed to evoke particular types of reactions and feelings and moods in its members. And a culture establishes the potency of those symbols through ritual, through song, and through dance. And one of the best ways then to inculcate cultural values, a cultural spirit, is through entertainment. Is while the members are being entertained, while they are feeling good, the song is carrying the cultural values into the mind and into the body. The lyrics that represent the cultural interest, the lyrics that represent cultural values, are being carried on the vehicle of.
So yeah, for you guys that's still here, if you're not familiar with Dr. Amos Wilson, you see the brother it's already laid the blueprint out. Like I was just saying, people move together. That's why I said I want to go to Sierra Leone and build a community. So when I bring folks over doing my tour business, we got a place to settle together and work together in tangent, just like we would if we were dancing, and create networks around our business culture, right? And then from there, we gain political power as well as economic power. But we have to do it together. It don't take a lot. Really, I think if 100 of us went to Africa and lived in this community, we can literally move and shake the whole culture. Just 100. So this is why I wanted to do this. And I'm probably do it a little bit more often because I see people probably will get a real lesson out of it. Plus, you can see me as I react to it. So it's time to break the fast. So let me go ahead and do that. And then maybe if I'm feeling all good later, I'll come back on and chop it up with y'all. But hopefully, y'all get the message. Now, I put the Patreon in there and the Cash App. Of course, we have nothing yet. So it's going to be a lot of minutia to break through to get to our people so we can get this thing built. But I'm going to keep hammering away and chipping away until we finally break into your consciousness. More likely through the subconscious, and then you'll start acting things out in your conscious. So I see we got a lot of work to do. You know what I mean? I'm just ahead of the curve. So we'll get y'all up to snuff. I'm just going to keep chipping away until y'all get it. We need 83 cents a day from everybody to get this community built. And we're going to keep hammering it home every day until you get through some of y'all thick skulls. But you know I love you. It's all in love and respect. Peace. I am out of here. Till later.